Professor S.R. Sarma was formerly Professor of Sanskrit at Aligarh Muslim University. After his retirement, he has been visiting professor at Kyoto University, University of British Columbia, and at the Harvard University. Currently, he is preparing a descriptive catalogue of the pre-modern astronomical instruments of India which are extant in India and outside. He presently lives in Dusseldorf, Germany, and is still active at the age of 77. So please put your hands together to welcome a young man of 77. Professor Sarma.
Dr. Kakotkar, Dr. Bedekar, Dr. Agarkar, ladies and gentlemen, we are assembled here to celebrate the 900th birth anniversary of Bhaskaracharya, an eminent mathematician, astronomer, and also excellent poet. I lay emphasis on the last word. He's an excellent poet. When we were planning this conference, we thought, naturally, it's in India, it's the practice to have a Mangalacharana at the beginning. And in Sanskrit, there are a number of beautiful verses. But Bhaskaracharya himself wrote a number of fine verses in each of his books. So we thought we would have each of Bhaskaracharya's Mangalacharanas at every event and before every plenary lecture. And we also chose some Mangalacharanas from the commentaries on Bhaskaracharya's works. The Mangalacharana which you have heard in a beautiful rendering today is from the Kriya Kramakari, one of the important commentaries on the Leelavati. Now and then we organized this conference in several thematic sections, each dealing with one of his works or some of the commentaries. And then in each theme, there would be a plenary lecture, first a Mangalacharana, a plenary lecture, and a number of presentations. This has been shown clearly in the book of abstracts which you have. I have been asked today to give a brief overview of the scientific heritage of India and explain the place of Bhaskaracharya in this heritage. It's a bit tall order because here is assembled perhaps the largest group in recent years of people working on history of astronomy and mathematics in Sanskrit. I do not have to give them any overview or about the position of Bhaskaracharya in this state of affairs. But for others, I thought I would mention a few simple facts and about the scientific activity that has been going on in India for a long period. The general perception about our scientific achievements oscillates between two extremes. From claims, which you hear in every newspaper, from claims that everything from aeroplanes to atom bombs was invented long ago in India, at one extreme, to assertions that we were interested only in spiritual values and did not care for material benefits, that is another extreme. Neither is wholly correct. It is needless to say India paid as much attention to dharma, artha, and kama as it did to moksha. But about scientific activity, it has been going on in India continuously from the remotest antiquity. I shall give only some simple examples, also illustrate the problems a historian of science faces. Let us first take the number system. In Vedic period, at the time of the horse sacrifice, the priests offer oblations throughout the night. The Taittiriya Samhita lays down that on this occasion, the following mantras are to be recited. Ekasmai Swaha, to one, hail. Dvabhyam Swaha, to two, hail. Tripya Swaha, Chaturpya Swaha, Panchapya Swaha, and go on reciting Swaha with each number. This goes on up to 100, and then 200, 300, 400, and so on. That is simple numbers recited one after the other. Or they also take sometimes just odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, and so on, or even numbers, 2, 4, 6, and so on. Not only that, they also play with arithmetical progression, say by 4s, 4, 8, 12, and so on up to 100, and then end with Sarvasmai Swaha to all Swaha. In this manner, there are arithmetical progressions by 5s, 10s, 20s, 50s, etc. This playful use of numbers during the solemn business of sacrifice indicates that a highly numerate society. Again, in the Vajrasaneyi Samhita, we find mantras like the following. I only give the translation. O Agni, may these bricks used in the sacrifice turn into milk-yielding cows for me. May 1 cow become 10, may 10 cows become 100, and so on. In this context, the Vajrasaneyi Samhita mentions a series of 13 decuple terms, where each term is 10 times greater than the previous one. Thus, you have beginning with Eka to Parartha, which is 10 to the power of 12. Here you can see the origin of decimal numbers. Later on, the concept of zero was developed, and also the notion of place value. These three elements together constitute the decimal place value system, which is now universally practiced. This one example serves also as the best illustration for the problematic of the history of science in India. Sanskrit sources provide adequate evidence to show that the decimal place value system developed in the remote past in India, but these sources are not adequate enough to tell precisely at which chronological point some of the elements developed which constitute the place value system. For example, the term Shunya, which stands for zero, occurs for the first time in Pingala's Chanda Sutra. In a slightly different context, we are not certain whether at Pingala's time Shunya denoted everything that zero denoted in later times. But Pingala's work is important for another reason. Pingala classifies the verse meters according to a binary system of short and long syllables, which is akin to the binary system on which the modern computer operates. Pingala's work also contains the first exercises of permutation and combination, because for composing a verse, you should know the sequence in which short and long syllables are arranged. But Pingala's treatment of the sequences goes far beyond the requirements of verse making. And here, the scientific discipline of combinatorics begins to take shape. Similar things happened also in the context of making fire altars in sacrifices. The altars had to be made according to certain specifications. And in this context arose the notions of lines, areas, and volumes. Certain altars had to have different geometrical shapes, but retaining the same area, which meant this gave rise to several procedures for manipulating areas. It is in this context that the Baudhayana Shulba Sutra formulates the so-called Pythagoras theorem, much before Pythagoras. This is one of the several cases where India had anticipated scientific discoveries much before the other nations did. There are thousands of Sanskrit manuscripts available throughout India dealing with astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and similar scientific subjects, but only a very small fraction of these manuscripts have been studied to map the scientific progress of the nation. But mapping the technological progress or writing a history of technology in India is a different kind of task. While there are plenty of manuscripts on astronomy or mathematics, etc., there are no records about the technological processes involved in metallurgy, architecture, or even in the manufacture of common objects of daily use. For various reasons, which I shall not go into here, Indians have neglected recording technical processes. We all know about the iron pillar of Delhi, which Anantharaman called the rustless wonder. It never rusts. There is no record of how it was produced or even when. I will just cite one more case. The Annals of Science published recently a paper by Brian Newbery, where he reports about the metallographic analysis he had performed on some brass astrolabes produced in the 17th century in India by applying a new non-destructive technique of high-energy synchrotron X-ray analysis. This analysis revealed that the astrolabes have a higher content of zinc than the brass produced by other methods. The brass used for these astrolabes must have been produced by co-melting copper and metallic zinc. The high percentage of zinc facilitates the fabrication of thin metal sheets from thicker ones by repeated hammering, but without frequent heating. Metallic zinc was produced in Zawar in Rajasthan from 13th century onwards. We have archaeological records. And these astrolabes provide the first evidence for brass production by directly alloying copper and zinc. This process was unknown, says Newbery, in Europe until the 19th century. But once again, there are no written records of this metallurgical process, except the astrolabe plates which were produced by using this technique. Therefore, writing a coherent history of technology in India without any records, but merely on the basis of surviving products of technical procedures, is beset with great difficulties. In 1966, Hans Wolff published a marvelous book called The Traditional Crafts of Persia, Their Development, Technology, and Influence on Eastern and Western Civilizations from the MIT Press. As the principal of the Tehran Polytechnic, Wolff had the opportunity to closely study and record the traditional methods of manufacture in Iran. If you get a chance, please to read this book. This is a splendid book. Unfortunately, no such comprehensive book was produced in India, and it is somewhat late to do so now because the traditional methods are being fast replaced by modern technologies. However, there might still be pockets where traditional methods of manufacture are being still followed. Koshambe once formulated, India is the place where there is living prehistory. You can have prehistorical things side by side, later things. So maybe, if these can be identified and recorded, it would be of great value for the history of technology. Luckily, we have today better tools for recording such things, these things, than Wolff had, so we can video record these processes. Now, unfortunately, history of science and technology is not in the curriculum of any Indian universities. Consequently, the few scholars who work on the history of science do so as a hobby outside their professional activities. The Indian National Science Academy provides funding for some projects every year. They also publish a quarterly journal called Indian Journal for History of Science, but they do not maintain a library specializing in history of science. Perhaps the largest collection of books, journals, and other documents on history of science can be found not in any university library in India, but at Vijay Bedekar's Institute of Oriental Study. Now that gives me a chance to. In these circumstances, it is highly creditable that Dr. Bedekar has decided to celebrate the 900th birth anniversary of Bhaskaracharya with year-long activities. Bhaskara was born in 1114 at a place called Vijalavida, somewhere near Sahyadri range, in a family of reputed scholars. His teacher was his own father Maheshwara. Bhaskara says that all that he knows is just a fraction of his father's learning. Nevertheless, he mastered all the traditional branches of learning and made valuable contributions to mathematical astronomy through his writings. Comprehensive treatment of the subject, careful organization of the material, lucid exposition, and high poetic quality of diction made his writings near canonical in the subsequent centuries. His works were studied throughout the country, and many commentaries were composed on his works. And he was revered by all as Bhaskaracharya. Bhaskara's grandson Changadeva established a college for the study of Bhaskara's works, and he set up an inscription there in 1207. On Saturday morning, the noted archaeologist Dr. Arvind Jamkhedkar will deliver a plenary lecture on this inscription. The inscription mentions the names of several ancestors of Bhaskaracharya. One of these was named Bhaskarapata, and he was said to be the Vidyapati of the legendary King Bhoja of Dara. The title Vidyapati seems to imply that Bhaskarapata had the duty of drafting the inscriptions issued in the name of King Bhoja. As you may know, that the inscriptions issued by the kings are also of high poetic quality. So only a poet can write these things. First, there would be a poetic composition about the king, and then there would be an operative part, what this inscription says. The same happened with the Changadeva's inscription on Bhaskaracharya. There are a number of verses, some of them even beautiful, and later there is the operative part is in Old Marathi. You will hear more details on them. I should mention that it is in this Changadeva's inscription, you will find this line, Vibhutha Bhivandita Pado Jayati Shri Bhaskaracharya, that which we have chosen this as the logo for this conference, so you will find it everywhere printed on the top. Now, so the title Vidyapati seems to imply that Bhaskarapata had the duty of drafting inscriptions. Indeed, Bhaskarapata's father Trivikramapata had composed the text of two inscriptions issued in the name of King Indraraja III in the year 905. Trivikrama also composed the Nalachampu, a poetic composition with a mixture of prose and verse. Here the long prose passages are permeated by slesha, which means that the passages have two layers of meaning. This is a feature one finds in our Bhaskaracharya's writings as well. Professor Filioza, his plenary lecture on Saturday morning, will throw light on this aspect of Bhaskaracharya's poetry. Unlike some of his ancestors and some of his descendants, Bhaskara does not appear to have sought royal patronage. He probably remained at Vijalavida throughout his long life and engaged himself in writing and teaching, although no names of his students have come down to us. In the next 3 days of the international conference, there will be plenary lectures and other presentations on Bhaskaracharya's life, his poetry, each of his individual works, namely the Lilavati, Bijaganita, Siddhanta Shiromani, and Karana Kutuhala, and the mathematical and astronomical procedures involved there. The Lilavati and Bijaganita were translated into Persian at the courts of Akbar and Shah Jahan, respectively. Tomorrow, my friend Professor S.M.R. Ansari will speak on these and other translations of Bhaskara's works. I spoke earlier of year-long activities. Dr. Bedekar wished that besides the international conference, which is primarily meant for experts in the field, there should be workshops meant for school and college students. From January onwards, Professor Sudhakar Agarkar is the Dean of VPM's Academy of International Education and Research, tirelessly conducted some 37 workshops in Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh. In one of these sessions, Professor Agarkar will speak about these workshops. And with these remarks, I shall now leave for the speaker of this evening, Professor Kakodkar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sarma.